to be reading chapter 21 today. You should have already read chapter 20 on your own. To a brief recap of that chapter. Becky and Tom are still kind of having an argument. They're still mad at each other, but he ends up ripping a page in her school book. Tom get her in trouble. He kind of snuck on her and started her and jumped it, ripped the page. She's afraid she's going to get in a ton of trouble. Tom ends up taking the punishment for her because he knew that she would have been absolutely mortified if she had gotten in trouble. So, chapter 21, we're going to see a story having to do with the end of school, okay, which many of you may be feeling very similar to the boys and girls in this class in this chapter. So follow along as we read. Chapter 21. Vacation was approaching, meaning summertime. The schoolmaster, who was always severe, grew severer and more exacting than ever, for he wanted the school to make a good showing on examination day. Okay, so examination day was a day towards the end of the year where someone would come in and kind of observe the class and see how the student is doing, see how the teacher is doing. And so he's being very, very strict with the kids because he wants to be absolutely perfect on a day. His rod and his rule were seldom idle now, at least among the smaller pupils. Only the biggest boys and young escaped lashing. Mr. Dobbin's lashings were very vigorous ones, too. For although he carried on his wig a perfectly bald and shiny head, he had only reached middle age and there was no soundness in his muscle. So here the author is describing that is a young man who apparently had gone bald pretty early in life. He wears a wig to cover that up because he wants to be young and so even though he may have a bald head, he certainly is not old and frail. He has quite a bit of muscle, so his whippings and lashings hurt pretty badly. As the great day approached, all the tyranny that was in him came to the surface. He seemed to take a vindictive pleasure in punishing the least shortcomings. The consequence was that the smaller boys spent their days in terror and suffering, in their nights in plotting revenge. They threw away no opportunity to do stir mischief, but he kept ahead all the time. The wreck followed every vengeful success was so sweeping and majestic that the boys always retired from the field badly worsted. Okay, so what they're saying is because Mr. Dobbins, the schoolmaster, is being so strict, the boys in the class, especially the younger boys, are spend most of their time planning how they can prank him and get back at him for being so mean and strict the last couple of days. At last they conspired together and hit upon a plan that promised a dazzling victory. They swore in the sign painter's boy, told him the scheme, and asked his help. He had his own reasons for being delighted, for the master boarded in his father's family and had given the boy ample cause to hate him. The master's wife would go on a visit to the country in a few days, and there would be nothing to interfere with the plan. The master always prepared himself for great occasions by getting pretty well fuddled, and the sign painter's boy said that when the dominie had reached the proper condition on examination evening, he would manage the thing while he napped in his chair. Then he would have him awakened at the right time and hurried away to school. Okay, so real quickly, the sign painter's boy is basically the man who works in the village as the sign painter, kind of like would be like a normal an hour day. His son is in Mr. Dobbins' class. So the boys that are planning this prank on Mr. Dobbins tell the sign painter's boy about their plans, and they end up getting him in on the prank. He's like, yeah, absolutely, I'll help you out. So what would happen is before examination day, Mr. Dobbins, the schoolmaster, his wife would go on vacation for a little while, and the night before examination day, it looks like the schoolmaster, Mr. Dobbins, would get, it says, pretty well fuddled, meaning he probably would get himself super relaxed either by drinking or smoking or whatever, what have you. And when he had reached the proper condition, so when he had reached the point where he was, probably falling asleep in his chair, super relaxed, wouldn't remember anything, that is when the sign painter's boy would manage the thing, or he would pull the prank then. In fullness of time, the interesting occasion arrived. At 8 in the evening, the schoolhouse was brilliantly lighted and adorned with wreaths and festoons of foliage and flowers. The master sat throned in his great chair upon a raised platform, with his blackboard behind him. He was looking tolerably mellow. 3 rows of benches on each side and 6 rows in front of him were occupied by the dignitaries of the town and by the parents of the pupils. So, in essence, this is like an open house night. Everyone in town has come to the school to kind of see their end of year performance, almost like an end of year award ceremony. To his left, back of the rows of citizens, was the temporary platform upon which were seated the scholars who were to take part in the exercises of the evening. Rows of small boys watched us to an intolerable state of discomfort. Rows of gawky big boys, snowbanks of girls and young ladies clad in lawn and muslin and conspicuously conscious of their arms, their grandmother's ancient trinkets, their bits of pink and blue ribbon, and the flowers in their hair. Basically, all the boys and girls that were going to perform at the ceremony that evening, the award ceremony, they were dressed very nicely. All the rest of the house was filled with non-scholars. The exercises or the performances began. A very little boy stood up and she recited, "You'd scarcely expect one of my age to speak on stage," etc., accompanied with painfully exact and spasmodic gestures with which a machine makes, supposing the machine to be a trifle out of order. Basically, this little boy was using all the hand motions he was told to, but he looked a little bit more like a robot than a good speaker. But he got through safely, though cruelly scared, and got a fine round of applause when he made his manufactured bow and retired. A little shamefaced girl lisped, "May we had a widow wham," etc. Performed a passionate, inspiring courtesy, got a rate of applause, and Tom Sawyer stepped forward. Oh boy, this is not going to be good. With conceited confidence and soared into the unquenchable and indestructible "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, with fine fury and frantic gesticulation, and actually broke down in the middle of it. A ghastly stage fright seized him. His legs began to quake under him, and he was like to choke. True, he had the manifest sympathy of the house, but he had the house's silence, too, which was even worse than its sympathy. The master frowned, and this completed the disaster. Tom struggled a while and then retired, utterly defeated. There was a weak attempt at applause, but it died early. So when Tom Sawyer got up to do his recitation, basically, it did not go so well, and he kind of chickened out. He got stage fright, couldn't finish the recitation, and sit down a little bit embarrassed. The boys stood on the burning deck, followed. Also, the Assyrian came down, and other declamatory gems. Then there were reading exercises and a spelling fight, so like a spelling bee. The meager Latin class recited with honor. But the prime feature of the evening was in order now. Original compositions by the young ladies. Each in her turn stepped forward to the edge of the platform, cleared her throat, held up her manuscript, which was tied with dainty ribbon, and proceeded to read with labored attention to expression and punctuation. The themes were the same that had been illuminated upon similar occasions by their mothers before them, their grandmothers, and doubtless all their ancestors in the female line clear back to the Crusades. Friendship was one, memories of other days, religion and history, dreamland, the advantages of culture, forms of political government compared and contrasted, melancholy, filial love, heart longings, etc., etc. A prevalent feature in these compositions was a nursed and petted melancholy. Another was a wasteful and opulent gush of fine language. Basically, all these girls that got up to read the stories or novels or poems they had wrote had a ridiculous amount of fancy language. Another thing you would see was a tendency to lug in by the ears particularly prized words and phrases until they were worn entirely out. And a peculiarity and conspicuously marked and marred them was the inveterate, intolerable sermon that wagged its crippled tail in everyone. So basically, he's describing these are people stories by middle and high school girls, typically have some kind of love or compassion story, lots of feelings, and then always has some kind of sermon or moral at the end. Very typical girls writing, especially back then. No matter what the subject, a brain effort was made to squirm it into some aspect or other that the moral and religious mind could contemplate with edification. The glaring insincerity of these sermons was not sufficient to compass the banishment of the fashion from the schools, and it is not sufficient today. It never will be sufficient while the world stands, perhaps. There is no school in all our land where the young ladies do not feel obliged to close their compositions with a sermon. And you will find that the sermon of the most frivolous and the least religious girl in the school is always the longest and the most relentlessly pious or proud. But enough of this. Homely truth is unpalatable. Let us return to the examination. The first composition that was read was one entitled, Is This Then Life? Perhaps the reader can endure an extract from it. So then it gives us a little bit of what was in that written composition. In the common walks of life, with what delightful emotions does the youthful mind look forward to some anticipated scene of festivity! Imagination is busy sketching rose-tinted pictures of joy. In fancy, the voluptuous votary of fashion sees herself amid the festive throng, the observed of all observers. Her graceful form, arrayed in snowy robes, is whirling through the mazes of the joyous dance. Her eye is brightest, her step is lightest in the assembly. In such delicious fancies time quickly glides by, and the welcome hour arrives for her entrance into the Elysian world, of which she has had such bright dreams. How fairy-like does everything appear to her enchanted vision! Each new scene is more charming than the last. But after a while she finds that beneath this goodly exterior all is vanity. The flattery which once charmed her soul now grates harshly upon her ear. The ballroom has lost its charms, and with wasted health and embittered heart, she turns away. With the conviction that earthly pleasures cannot satisfy the longings of the soul. Okay, so let me pause for a second. The author here, Tom Mark Twain, no, Mark Twain knows that most of his readers are probably not going to care what that composition actually says, nor are they going to be able to understand it because it's a prime example of what he was just describing. Full of ridiculously fancy language, has some sort of sermon at the end, very full of like kind of flowery feeling type words, just very common of what a typical writing from these girls would be like. And so forth and so on. There was a buzz of gratification from time to time during the reading, accompanied by whispered ejaculations of, "Oh, how sweet! How eloquent! So true!" etc. And after the thing had closed with a peculiarly afflicting sermon, the applause was always enthusiastic. Then arose a slim, melancholy girl, whose face had the interesting paleness that comes of pills and indigestion, and she read a poem. Only two stanzas of it will do. A Missouri Maiden's Farewell to Alabama. Alabama, goodbye, I love thee well, but yet for a while do I leave thee now. Sad, yes, sad thoughts of thee my heart doth swell, and burning recollections throng my brow. Okay, so I'm going to read the rest, but just keep in mind this is a poem about a girl moving from Alabama, apparently. For I have wandered through thy flowery woods, have roamed and read near Tallapoosa's streams, have listened to Tallahassee warring floods, and wooed on Coosa's side Aurora's beam. Yet shame I not to bear an o'erfull heart, nor blush to turn behind my tearful eyes. 'Tis from no stranger land I must part, 'tis to no stranger's left I yield these sighs. Welcome and home were mine within this state, whose vales I leave, whose spires fade fast from me, and cold must be mine eyes and heart and teat, when, dear Alabama, they turn cold on thee. There were very few there who knew what teat meant, but the poem was very satisfactory nevertheless. Next appeared a dark-complexioned, black-eyed, black-haired young lady, who paused an impressive moment, assumed a tragic expression, and began to read in a measured, solemn tone. A vision, dark and tempestuous was night. Around the throne on high not a single star quivered, but the deep intonations of the heavy thunder constantly vibrated upon the ear, whilst the terrific lightning revelled in angry mood through the cloudy chambers of heaven, seeming to scorn the power exerted over its terror by the illustrious Franklin. Even the boisterous winds unanimously came forth from their mystic homes and blustered about as if to enhance by their aid the wildness of the scene. At such a time, so dark, so dreary, for human sympathy my very spirit sighed, but instead thereof, my dearest friend, my counselor, my comforter and guide, my joy in grief, my second bliss in joy, came to my side. She moved like one of those bright beings pictured in the sunny walks of fancy's Eden by the romantic and young, a queen of beauty unadorned save by her own transcendent loveliness. So soft was her step, it failed to make even a sound, and but for the magical thrill imparted by her genial touch, as other unobtrusive beauties, she would have glided away unperceived, unsought. A strange sadness rested upon her features, like icy tears upon the robe of December, as she pointed to the contending elements without, and bade me contemplate the two beings presented. This nightmare occupied some 10 pages of manuscript, and wound up with a sermon so destructive of all hope to non-Presbyterians that it took the first prize. This composition was considered to be the very finest effort of the whole evening. The mayor of the village, in delivering the prize to the author of it, made a warm speech in which he said that it was by far the most eloquent thing he had ever listened to, and that Daniel Webster himself might well be proud of it. It may be remarked in passing that the number of compositions in which the word beauteous was overfondled, and human experience referred to as life's page was up to the usual average. Now, the master, mellow almost to the verge of geniality, put his chair aside, turned his back to the audience, and began to draw a map of America on the blackboard to exercise the geography class upon. Okay, so after all of these it's almost like the recitations and readings are over, and they're done showing off their writings. Now, Master Dobbins wants to show off his students' knowledge of geography. So he turns his back to the whole audience, the whole award ceremony, and he's drawing on the blackboard a map of America. But he made a sad business of it with his unsteady hand. He was obviously nervous and shaking, so the drawing turned out kind of bad. And a smothered tear rippled over the house. He knew what the matter was and set himself to write. He sponged outlines and remade them, but he only distorted them more than ever, and the tittering was now more pronounced. It was like laughter. upon the work now, as if determined to not be put down. He felt that all eyes were fastened upon him. He imagined he was succeeding, and yet it continued. It even manifestly increased, and well it might. Let me pause for a second. The more he tries to correct this map, the more the kids are laughing. But it's almost like they're laughing at something else, because issues with drawing the map of America are not funny. There was a garret above, or like a little like a hole. Pierce was scuttle over his head. And down through this scuttle came a cat, suspended around the haunches by a string. She had her head and jaws to keep her from yapping. As she slowly did, she heard and at the string. She swung down and clawed at the intangible air. So again, I had no idea this is happening. It would be like if I were in a classroom teaching you guys, I was bored, and all of a sudden this cat started coming from the ceiling. But we're in the middle of an award ceremony, the whole school and you guys just can't help but laugh. The tree was higher and higher. The cat was 6 inches of the absorbed teacher's head. Down, a little lower, and she grabbed his wig with her desperate claws, clung to it, and was snatched up into the garret in an instant, with her trophy still in her possession. And how the light did blaze abroad from the master's bald pate, for the sign painter's boy had gilded it. Okay, so gilded means painted. Okay, so what happened was, as that cat was, whichever boy was pulling this prank, they were lowering the cat from the ceiling. The cat came down, snatched the Pastor Dobbins' wig, and then they, with claws, he grabbed the cat, grabbed onto it, and they yanked the cat back up while he was still on it. So now the master's bald head is now in front of the whole award ceremony, and not only that, this is the kicker. The sign painter's boy had gilded it. Gilded means painted. So while he was asleep and drunk or relaxed or whatever it was the night before, the sign painter's boy had taken his dad's paint and painted his head. So now his painted bald head is in front of this whole crowd of people at the award ceremony. Well, you can imagine that broke up the meeting. The boys were avenged, meaning they had finally gotten their revenge, and vacation had come. Note: the pretended compositions quoted in this chapter are taken without alteration from a volume entitled Prose and Poetry by a Western Lady, but they are exactly and precisely after the schoolgirl pattern, and hence are much happier than any mere imitation study. So that little note there at the end is just Mark Twain's kind of like citing his sources, basically saying that he did not write those the works that he quoted that the girls were reciting at the award ceremony. He borrowed them from somebody else's book. But this chapter is really funny because obviously you get to see the prank was full on poor master, but it certainly was quite the prank, and it is certainly a way to get that meeting to end and summer to start pretty quickly.